Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Romance and Royalty. This is the summer class Tuesdays at the Safra Synagogue. It's an honor to be here. It's a beautiful, warm day today. If you're watching this, I hope you're sitting in a cool place. If you're looking for the source sheets that I have, if you need them, please email me, Reuven, R-E-U-V-E-N, @ejsny.org. I am happy to share all the material that I have here for the class. Okay, so we're going to be spending the summer looking at or re-examining the stories that surround the patriarchs and matriarchs that led to King David and Mashiach. And I think this is an important topic because we're living at an interesting time where we're seeing, we'll call it messianic signs up here. And we want to understand what it's all about. You know, where is all this leading to? And who are the people that helped forge this person? What is it that we believe in? Who are these individuals? Why do they go through the lives that they had to go through? What are their stories really teaching us? What are we meant to learn from them? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to look back at the sources. And I know that there's different styles of learning, and I'll be very straightforward and upfront. I do believe that these particular stories that surround Yehudah and David and Lot even, we'll look at a little bit as well. We'll look a little bit at Ruth. You know, these stories cannot be understood in their literal level of just reading the psukim themselves. Yes, there is a literal, what we call pshat interpretation, and you could see that straight out in the story. You open up the book, read the story, it'll tell you something, a narrative. But the narrative only gives you a small piece of the puzzle. And that's what I want to do with you today. What I want to do with you today is I want to start at the beginning. We'll look at Yehudah and Tamar, Judah and Tamar. Yehudah was the fourth of the 12 sons of Jacob. He was the fourth son of Leah. And he was he's a fascinating character, and he becomes way more interesting when you read about him through the lenses of the Midrashim. Okay, the Midrash is a set of texts that are non-halachic. There are two parts to the Torah. We have the Torah Sheba'al Peh and the Torah Shebiktav, just so it's clear. Torah Shebiktav is the Torah that is written, and the Torah Sheba'al Peh is the oral transmission of the Torah. The Torah Shebiktav would be the 5 books of Moses, would be all the books of the prophets, and so on and so forth, and all the Megillot as well. Now, there's all sorts of things that are not found in those books. Like, for example, if you opened up your Tanakh, your Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, would you find anywhere any mention of making Kiddush on Friday night or lighting candles on Friday night? The answer is no. You would find no information, no instruction on how to check if your mezuzah was on right, or how to make the scrolls in your tefillin kosher, how to make sure, how to do a shechita, how to ritually slaughter a chicken and make it kosher. There's zero examples of that in the Torah itself. The Torah just says that keep kosher, like I told you, put a mezuzah on the door, like I showed you, but there's zero description of how to do those things. So it's obvious there must be a oral transmission that comes with the written text. Otherwise, the written text itself is unable to complete the story. This is important for me because I believe that this book is divine. I don't believe this is a collection of essays written by a bunch of old men in the desert, sitting in a cave saying, "Ooh, let's come up with some really cool story, and let's try to get all these people to believe in the things that we want to believe, that we want them to believe in because we're starting a religion." That's not how Judaism works. If I was sitting in a cave and I wanted to start a religion from scratch, it would look a lot like Christianity, right? It would not look anything like Judaism. I want it to be easy, something that could be easily transmitted, something that doesn't require a tremendous amount of effort and understanding. You know, to be Jewish requires resources, discipline, requires a tremendous amount of education, commitment. It's not easy at all. It requires a tremendous amount of discipline and dedication on the practitioner's part to be engaged in a life of Judaism that is meaningful. So, having said all that, if we believe that this text is divine, if we believe that there's a God that created the universe, we have to ask ourselves, well, why did he create the universe? Well, I'm going to say that he created the universe because he wanted to give man good. I can't come up with a better explanation for it. if once you do anything beyond that, you're limiting God to human reason. Even saying that God created the world because he wanted to give man good is limiting God on some level. I'm uncomfortable with that. And I'm only sharing that because that is what our rabbis have said. Olam chesed Hashem yibaneh. It's a quote from Tehillim. God created the world as an act of kindness. And therefore everything that he does, everything we see in the world itself, is an act of kindness itself. Okay? And therefore God creates the world of kindness. Everything that he does is tov. He wants to give you good. The circumstances that you find yourselves in sometimes is frustrating. But be mindful that the circumstances that you're in are perfectly curated to ensure that you can live a life of the most amount of meaning possible. And that's not an easy idea to internalize. It's not very palatable, but I believe there's a lot of truth to that. Now, if we do believe that God created a universe to give man good, right, then he had to have at some point communicated what that means and what that looks like. If there's no communication, if there's no way of explaining, describing what it is that he actually wants, the whole thing doesn't work. So, for example, if I want to give you a watch that tells time and you never saw a watch before, and I send it to you in a bottle, and you're sitting on the beach and you see this bottle wash ashore, and you find this amazing watch, and you have no idea what it does. It's just this little thing that has dials on it and things that are turning, but you have no idea what it does. Does that watch help you in any way? The answer is no, it does not help you. It's useless. The only way that watch would be meaningful is if it came with an instruction manual. We believe the Torah itself is an instruction manual to life. Why it's written this way, how it's communicated, how it's preserved, that is for a whole other series of classes that I'm not doing today. But I want you to be aware of the fact that some of what we're going to read today is going to be, all of it is going to be, most of it is going to be coming from Midrashim. The Midrashim are what we call the oral Torah. These are parts of the Torah that were not in the written Torah. These are things that were passed down through transmission. Okay, we believe that Moses received it from God, and therefore it's prophetic. This is not just, the rabbis thought this is what they said, this is what they think happened. We believe that through prophecy, that man has the ability of accessing this higher level of understanding, the nature, the thoughts of man. When you're reading Genesis, you're reading that Abraham sent out Hagar. Is that the way God is writing his thoughts, or are those his thoughts? What are we reading when we're reading about these individuals? What was Judah thinking? What was Tamar thinking? Are we reading their thoughts, or is this just the narrative of what happened? So it's a little bit of both. Some of it is the narration, and some of it is the actual thoughts. How do we tell the difference? Well, sometimes we have midrashim that fill in those gaps for us. And that's what this sheet is. This packet over here is a packet of two things in here. So we have the verses that actually make up the story of Tamar and Yehudah, and also the midrashim that help us kind of fill in the gaps as to what was really going on. Because you'll see that if we just took out the Rashi and the Breshit Rabbah and the commentaries that are here, the story is closed. It doesn't really make any sense. And this is a very sensitive topic, which is why I'm starting with all this very long and boring disclaimer. Okay, I want you to, because we're going to get into some very, very heated conversation. Certainly for the ladies in here, because this is a fascinating story that requires a tremendous amount of explanation. So I'm forewarning you that there's parts of this that is the only way I can understand it and argue it is coming if we have an oral tradition. If there's no oral tradition, there's not much to read. There's not much conversation. There's not much I think that we actually learn from the story. It's actually very disturbing without the oral tradition. Any questions, comments before I begin? Nope. Okay. So let's just jump in. Okay, so this story starts after the sale of Joseph. Okay, so let's just go back. Jacob has 4 wives. He marries Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. These are the maidservants of both Rachel and Leah. And the children are older now, and there's a lot of jealousy happening in there. Okay, Joseph has these dreams that makes it sound as if he's going to rule over the siblings, even though amongst the brothers themselves, everyone knew that Judah was destined to be king. He was their leader, which is why if you read the story that goes before this, right, Judah is the one that is the ringleader helping navigate the conversation with the brothers. And he's the one that actually suggests that we should sell him and not kill him. Okay? And they all agree. Okay, so this story begins with right after Joseph was sold, And at this point, the brothers are frustrated because they see their father's reaction. Jacob goes into depression, and he doesn't want to talk to anybody. And they're blaming Judah on this. And this is where this verse begins. V'hi be'et hahi v'yered Yehudah me'et achav. Right? It's at that time where Judah was demoted by his brothers. He's brought down. V'yed et ish adlomi ushmo chira. He's been cast out by his brothers. He's looking for friendship, and he finds this guy named Chira, and he's an Edlumite, which I think is a Canaanite back then. There's different types of Canaanites, and he has a non-Jewish friend. Okay, he's looking to do business. Okay, where we go? Anyway, Mechila. Okay, so I didn't lose the whole thing. I just lost that little piece. Fine. So he is demoted by his brothers because of the sale of Joseph. This is exactly what Rashi tells me. Okay, let's just do it in English. We'll go faster that way because I have a lot to cover today. Why is this section placed here, interrupting the section dealing with the history of Joseph? To teach you that his brothers degraded him from his high position. When they saw their father's grief, they said, "You told us to sell him. If you had told us to send him back to the father, we would have also obeyed you." Right? So he enters into a line over there. He enters into a business partnership with this Chira. We don't really know why. We know that they were involved in doing some kind of business with sheep and cattle, but he's doing this business. Okay, so now what's interesting is this little piece of Midrash over here. Okay, Shvatim hayu oskim b'mechirato shel Yosef. The brothers were busy selling Joseph. Yosef was busy fasting. Reuven was in sackcloth fasting. Yaakov was busy in sackcloth fasting. Yehuda was busy taking a wife. Right? And the Holy One, blessed be He, what was he doing? Creating the light for the future of Mashiach. Right? Who was a descendant of Yosef. That's the Midrash. What's going on over here? What's the story about? This is an interesting story. This is an interruption in a bigger story about Joseph being sold as a slave to Egypt and his ascension to being the viceroy of Egypt. And now this is a little interruption here. This is like the commercial break. By the way, let's pause for a second and let's look at Judah, what's going on with him. So Judah at this point has caused a tremendous amount of grief. He saw Joseph as being a deadly person for the family. They thought he was someone who was childish, immature. He was a threat to the family name. He threatened Yaakov, he threatened Yehuda and their position, and therefore Yehuda believed that Joseph was deserving of death. He deserved the death penalty. He was a slanderer. He was someone who was somewhat narcissistic. Yosef was beautiful. He had long hair. They often saw him brushing his hair, looking in the mirror. Who's this guy walking around with this fancy technicolor coat that was given by his dad? And now he's telling us these dreams he's having of him ruling over all of us, including our father. This guy is a mazik. He's someone who could cause harm. He deserves a mazik, is a Hebrew word for someone who causes damages, and therefore we're going to get rid of him. Okay, so instead of getting rid of him, Yehuda comes to a compromise and says, "You know what? What's that?" Yehuda said, "We're going to sell him. Yeah, we're going to sell him. And whatever happens to him, happens to him. We'll throw him into this pit first, and then we're going to sell him." They sold him. Now the brothers, they demote Judah. "You made a mistake. This is a horrible idea. We have a lot of regret." So what does he do? He's not going and doing teshuvah. He's not sitting there crying like everybody else is crying. That's what Midrash says. Everyone's crying. Joseph is crying. Jacob is crying. The brothers, Reuven, the oldest brother, he regrets not being more proactive and helping free his brother. He had his own plans. Didn't work out. And over here, Yehuda is going out looking for shidduchim. Right? It's just, what does that tell us about his nature? What does it tell us about, the David, the lineage that King David, the Melech David comes from? Like, this is the story we want to hear about? Like, this is like a weird thing to be reading about. Like, what's it supposed to be teaching me? And then the Midrash has the chutzpah to ask, well, what was God doing? Right? It's one thing you're going to tell me about what the Shvatim were doing and what Yaakov was doing, but like, they're going to tell me what God was doing? Oh, well, you know what he's doing? God is doing what he's always doing. He's somehow arranging the events in history to ensure that it's able to ascend to its proper conclusion with the arrival of the Messiah. Strange thing. Okay, but what do you think this tells us about Yehudah?
Trying to create more siblings.
Okay, good. So, but is this the right response or the wrong response? What would you do? You just... He's moving on. Do you agree with the same thing? So there's nothing wrong with that. It's a great thing. But is this the right time to be moving on?
There is no right time.
There's never a right time. You just got to do what you got to do. So I happen to agree with that. I think the one thing that is powerful about this particular Midrash, number 3, is that it's telling us that in situations where it's hopeless, the only choice you have is to move on. Right? You're all this pain and suffering, and everyone's crying, and everyone's upset, and everyone feels somewhat stuck, and no one knows where to go, and no one knows what to do. You have a choice to make. You could sit there with your sackcloth and sit in the corner and cry about it, or you could move on. What does he do? He finds himself a business partner. He's like, I'm going to go make money. All right? And then after he's got his parnasah, he's looking for a shidduch. Right? Look at page number 2. Okay? Ve'yirah Sham Yehudah. Right? Yehuda sees one of the daughters of a bat ish Kanani, ushmo Shu'ah.
What chapter? What
We're on page number 2, number 4. There's no page number. Just look at number 4. Source number 4.
Okay.
Genesis 38, 2 through 7. Okay, Judah sees the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shu'ah, and he took her into his household as a wife, and he cohabited with her. Okay, they have relations. That's how they got married back then. In the olden days, before Matan Torah, the way in which a man married a woman is he knew her, biblically speaking, right? When you get to know each other, cohabitation takes place. V'yikachea v'yavo aleha. That is what marriage was back then. She conceived and bore a son, and his name was Er. She conceived again and bore another son. His name was Onen. Once again, she bore a son and named him Shelah, and he was at Chazib, where she bore them. Yehudah got a wife for Er, firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Yehudah's firstborn, was displeasing to God, and God took his life. Period. These are very, very fast succession things that happen. Now, how many years passed by in these verses? A lot, right? Because he had 3 kids, and plus the oldest son was old enough to marry a girl. So we're talking about a gap in the Torah for about 20 years between the sale of Joseph, and this is about 20, at least 18 years, maybe. You know, I don't know how old they were. Yeah. He may have. No, not immediately. He may have had a grandson named Onan. But he had Yehudah had a son named Onan. And interestingly, who was this girl that Yehudah marries? He married a Canaanite. What? Was he allowed to? Well, technically, yes. Who did they all marry? Right? They all married someone local. Marries a Canaanite woman. But the Midrash tells us that this guy Shua is actually a descendant of Shem. And Shem was a descendant of Noach. And Shem was also the Semitic tribe of Noah, which is related to us. So he didn't go too far out. He wasn't marrying someone who was completely estranged. This person, Tamar, grew up in a house who her grandfather was Shem, who was the high priest of Jerusalem at the time. Certainly there's a deep spiritual connection over here. They get married. Now, it's interesting the names that they chose. Can anyone tell me what's interesting about the names that he chose over here? Er. Read it backwards. What does it say? Well, strange name, right? Why would you name your kid Er? Right? It has Ra in it. And we know that he dies. Er dies. He does something that's super displeasing. Anyone know why he dies? Yeah. Question.
Yeah, no. Sorry. Shua is the descendant of Shem and the descendant of Noah. That's Yehudah married.
Correct.
Not Tamar.
Tamar is the descendant.
Well, eventually.
Correct. Correct. Good question. Yeah. Okay, so look what Rashi tells us. What was Ra be'enai Hashem? What was the evil that Er was involved in? Okay? So he says over here like this, like the wickedness of Onan and committing the same sin. What was it? What was the case? It must have been the cause of Onan. What was Onan's sin? Right? Onan's death was for a similar reason as Er's death. Why did Er commit the sin? So that he should not bear children and her beauty thereby become impaired. So what was the sin? Anyone ever hear of the English term named onanism?
I always thought that was from Noah's kids.
No, it's from here. Onanism is an English word, and it's the practice of literally it's birth control. Right? We see the next pasuk. We see it again over here. Look at Rashi. Let's look at the next set of verses. Yehudah said to Onan, "Join with your brother's wife, and do your duty by her as a brother-in-law, and provide offspring to your brother." Right? What does that sound like? That is, my friends, called yibum, the levirate marriage. We see it right over here. This is the source for yibum. But Onan, knowing that the offspring would not count as his, lest the semen go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife, so not to provide an offspring for his brother. So he pulls out. It's called the rhythm method, or practice coitus interruptus, as they call it. he wasted his semen on the ground. And Onan saw Tamar as this beautiful, gorgeous, stunning model of a woman, and they did not want to spoil her beauty by getting her pregnant. Why was this?
Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah.
The body changes.
Body changes,
It happens even today.
No, it happens today also, 100%. It's definitely it makes sense. I hear it. How many models today don't want to have children because they don't want their figures to get ruined? I don't think it's crazy. You have a beautiful girl who's very vivacious, and they see her, then like, oh, she's gorgeous, so I don't want her to lose her beauty as a result of having kids, right? So they decide to take this is their form of birth control. Okay, they pull out. Now God says this is bad, right? Now, is birth control prohibited in Judaism? The answer is no. It depends. There are plenty of times where a husband and wife can be intimate with one another and not have children, right? So when a woman's pregnant, that's a great example, right? Or if a woman's on birth control, which she can be under certain circumstances. So what was the actual sin that they were engaged in? What was wrong with and Onan's philosophical outlook?
Was it their intention?
There's two different commandments in Judaism as far as husband and wife. One is called Puravu, the mitzvah of having children. There's another one called Mitzvah Onah, which is the mitzvah of giving each other pleasure. Right? So certainly Mitzvah Onah is the mitzvah of giving each other pleasure. It's two separate commandments. One is to have children, the other is for pleasure. Right? And this is why, by the way, when a husband and wife can be together, even if that interaction will not produce a life, because there's a mitzvah of Onah, and therefore it's for pleasure, and that's permitted. So certainly, at the very least, there were times where he could be together with her, and it wasn't a complete waste. So why was he punished? Now, this is very important because I really believe that this is a criticism of a man objectifying a woman. Right? Is her purpose just to have children? Did he just see her as an object? Oh, I don't want to spoil your beauty, and therefore, you're my trophy wife. You're my trophy wife. Is that a relationship that a man is supposed to have with a woman? Trophy wife? Is that what she's there for? So he could adore her and look at her, and that's not a relationship that we're looking for at all.
Maybe she didn't want to get pregnant.
Well, if it's interesting. By the way, it's so interesting because in Judaism, a man can't take any birth control, but a woman can. Right? And the reason why a man can't take birth control is because he actually has a mitzvah to have children. She does not have a mitzvah to have children. A woman has no obligation to have kids.
Oh, I never knew that.
But a man does. And therefore a woman can take birth control, but a man cannot. So the focus is on so delicious. The focus is on him and not on her. So he's doing something. He's commanded to go ahead and have kids. He doesn't have children. She desperately. How do I know that she wants to have kids?
We don't know.
No, we will know in a second because we'll see that eventually she goes through Yehudah. She's looking for that. That's exactly what she wants. She understands. She sees something in the story that none of us see yet. Right? She's aware of something.
He's treating her as one of the brothers.
Right? She's upset. She wants this. Now let's take a pause a second. What is this mitzvah of yibum for a second? All right. Yibum works like this, just so it's clear. Yibum for our listeners, right? Yibum is a mitzvah like this. There's a commandment in Judaism that if a man and a woman get married, and this woman does not have, the wife does not have any children, the closest blood relative has a mitzvah to marry this widow. Okay? In the case over here of Yehudah, his son dies. The next son, Onan, has a mitzvah to marry this woman. Now, if she doesn't want to marry him, it's off. It only goes with consent. If she consents to it, they can get married. She consents, Onan and Tamar get married, and Onan has the same exact thought process as and he dies as well. Now, you have a son, you have 3 sons, and 2 of them married to this girl, and they both died. Now you have a 3rd son. Would you let the 3rd son marry this woman? Why not? Why not? What? It's too many coincidences. Right, 3 strikes. I don't want to take that chance. The odds are against you. Okay? Look at Rashi said, yeah.
I grew up thinking, that it was forbidden to marry your brother's widow in our religion. Now you tell me you have to marry your
If there's no kids. If there's no kids.
If they have kids.
They have kids, they have no obligation. Only when there's no children. No children. If there are children, that's different. This is no children.
Thank you.
Okay, and the interesting thing is this is a I would argue that this is a source for reincarnation, because what ends up happening is that the reason why in which she's marrying the closest blood relative is because the closest blood relative can provide a body that allows the soul to return again. Okay, this is why I'll explain. So there's something called chalitza. Let's say the brother does not want to marry this sister-in-law. So what happens is he comes to her, he takes off her shoe, she takes off his shoe, and she spits in it. So why is she doing that? What a weird thing. Gonna spit in the guy's shoe? Okay, it's a sandal, it's not so bad. Well, why are you spitting in his shoe? So shoes in Judaism, and we'll see this by the way soon, actually in a few weeks. On Tisha B'Av, what don't we wear? Leather shoes, right? Why not? Can I wear comfortable sneakers? Not a problem. What's that? Yeah, but what's the why? Why can't I wear leather shoes on Tisha B'Av? Why can't I wear leather shoes on Yom Kippur? Okay, so it's not comfort because I could wear Crocs that are very comfortable. I could wear other shoes that are very comfortable. What is the prohibition about? What? So we know, no, you're close, but we know that in the morning, all the brachot in the morning that we recite, the morning blessings that we recite, are somehow tethered to something else that we do in the morning. Opening our eyes, getting out of bed, right? We say the bracha of Sha'asali kol tzarki, the blessing of, blessed are you the Lord for giving me all that I have and all that I need. What part of the morning ritual is that blessing tethered to? Anyone know? That blessing, Sha'asali kol tzarki, is tethered to putting on your shoes in the morning. So now the words say, "Thank you, Lord, thank you, God, for giving me all that I have." What does that have to do with my shoes?
Keeps you going.
Ladies, you should be able to explain this to me. Shoes are important. I don't get it. What does everything that I have to do with shoes? Okay, keeps you moving. True. In Judaism, the na'al, the shoe itself, is a metaphor for the body, because the body is a shoe for the soul, and therefore, on Yom Kippur, on Tisha B'Av, we don't wear a leather shoe, which is an animal husk for the body. Symbolically, the same way we remove the leather shoe from the body, we want to remove the outer shoe, the body, and allow the soul to come forth. So for example, we see this in the Pasuk in Shemot, when God says to Moshe, Shal nal maraglecha, right? Remove your shoes, your sandals from this place, because it is holy ground. What was God really asking him to do? He was asking him to unzip his body and leave it behind and come forward with his soul. Okay? He was asking him to come out as a spiritual being. Leave your material behind and come forward as a neshama, as a soul. Stand before me as you are.
But the material is just the leather.
Why leather? Leather specifically, right? It's only for leather, because why? Because leather is animal skin. And we believe that the same way that the animal is the lower parts of living creatures, the human body is the lower part of ourselves, that it has its own nature. The soul has this deep desire to soar.
The shoe can taint your soul?
No. The shoe is it's metaphorical, right? We just want to remove the animal husk from our body. We want to remove the animal lower parts of the self from ourselves. That's why we remove the leather. That's all it is. It's a philosophical idea. It's nothing, forget about that. Just a philosophical idea. So here, he has something called yibum. There's a mitzvah of going ahead and remarrying, because we believe that the soul has an opportunity to come back, and this is exactly what she wants to do. What her intentions are, we don't know yet. All we know is that she married these two boys. They both died. We know that they had corrupt intentions. Okay, they saw her as a trophy wife and not as a person, not as a woman that has her own mission in this world. She is left aside. Okay? Questions? No? Okay, good. Let's keep going. Look at number 10. Okay, the days sorry, let's go back to number 8. Okay, so this was the pleasing. We did this already? No.
Page 1 or page 2?
We're on page 3. Top of page 3. So, and what he did was displeasing to God. So he who took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. Because he thought he too might die like the brother. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. So the Torah tells us over here that Yehudah's intention was to delay tactics. You know, you go back to your dad's house, and when you're ready, when my younger son is ready, because she understood the law is that Shelah would have to marry her, but you go back to your house, maybe she'll forget about it, and maybe she'll go away, but his intention was to never allow his youngest son to marry this girl. Okay? So she's out. Number 10, V'yirbu v'tamat Batsheva eshet Yehudah, and time goes by, and now this Yehudah's wife dies. Okay, now he's single, right? When his period of mourning was over, Yehudah went up to Timnah, to the sheep shearers, together with his friend Chira, right? We saw him before, his partner. And Tamar was told, your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for the sheep shearing. So she took off her widow's garb, because she was a widow, waiting to get remarried, covered her face with a veil, and wrapping herself, sat down at the entrance to Enim, right, or Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, and she saw that Shelah was grown up and had not been given to him as a wife. And she understood right here for the first time that Yehudah's intention was to never allow the two of them to get married. Their intention was to keep them separate. So what does she do? So first of all, let's go look at Rashi. What does Rashi tell us? But why did she cover her face? He wanted to make sure that she would not be recognizable to him. She already had clear intentions. At the crossroads of Petach Enaim, at the opening of the eyes, the crossroads of the road to Timnah, our sages, however, explain that midrashically to mean that the entrance, Petach, to the residence of our father Abraham, which is all eyes, and Enaim looked to, and that's where they were. For why she saw that Shelah grew up, she had this clarity of a vision, understanding that Yehudah was not interested at all in him allowing her to marry her brother-in-law Shelah. Okay, so this is where the story ends. Now, what is the covering up in the story? It's important. We're not going to just tell us. The Torah is not going to mention it for no reason. Why is it important that we know that she covered her face? Why is that so important? So, okay, it's true, but that's obvious, right? We know that that's why you do that. It's a disguise, right? But
Not to show her emotions.
Okay, true, good. Also concealing an inner intention, very good. But we know that covering up is definitely a subject that's very much part of Judaism, right? Like we speak about tzniut in a very explicit kind of way. And like, what is that? How do we understand tzniut? Because certainly this is going to play a very important. We know what happens next, right? I'm assuming you all know what happens next in the story, right? So what was she thinking? And how does getting dressed up like a harlot, like a harlot, like a zonah, like a prostitute? But was that the way harlots? I mean, I've never really known many. I don't know any harlots ever. I don't know any. Thank God. But like I'd imagine that they're generally not snu'ah, walking down the streets in long Beis Yaakov skirts and like covered up with like with a face mask or anything like that. That's not how you sell yourself. So what was going on over here? What's that? It was COVID. She was wearing a face mask. I don't think so. Okay, so look what happens. Yehudah, Judah sees her, and he thinks that she was a zonah, a harlot. Why? Because she was covered. She covered her face. I guess harlots back then covered their faces, right? So
she also let her hair down.
She did that also.
And that's
also a sign of a harlot. But it's just like an interesting thing. It's like a cultural distinction over here for ourselves. Just be aware of the fact that it's a little different. So, says, what does she say? He says, okay, and he says, get ready now and I will come to you. For he did not know that she was her daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that I should come to, to come to me? Like, what's my, if I'm a harlot and you want to come and you want to test the goods, then what are you paying? Right? And he said, I will send a kid from the herd. Right, I'm a shepherd, and I have all these sheep. I'll send you a nice shawarma later for your services, right? Okay, if you give me a pledge until give me something, give me some kind of collateral. So he said, okay, what is the pledge I should give you? She says, give me your signet and your cloak and the staff that's in your hand. Give me the things that I want something tangible now. And then go ahead, we'll make this deal. They're bartering over here, right? You want my services, I'll give you your services, not a problem, but I want to get paid. Give me some collateral. So she says, okay. He says, okay, I'll give you this ring, my staff, and my cloak. Okay? Now it's interesting, by the way. What an interesting thing. Think about those three things. A signet ring, a staff, and a cloak are not just random pieces of things that people walk around with. Right? A staff, a scepter of a king. Signet ring of a king. Cloak of a king. Malchut. Yehudah is a melech. He's not just some guy. You understand also, he was the head of the Beit Din. He's not. You understand what's going on over here? I'm reading a story, and we're talking about like the Chafetz Chaim walking down the street, seeing some pretty girl, and saying, "Hey, babes, how much? What do your services cost?" Like that's the story we're reading. Right? How do we understand this? This is very disturbing. This is not a normal story, right? He's a tzaddik. We're talking about a righteous person. The king of the Jewish people is making a deal with a harlot. How do we reconcile that? How do we understand that? This should be very upsetting to us. So, and he agrees to these terms. Okay, so he gave them to her. He came to her, and she conceived his life. They agreed to the terms. Then she arose and went away. She took off her veil and she donned her. She went back into her normal clothing. She got rid of her costume. Yehudah sent the kid by the hand of this his friend, right, Chira, to take the pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Okay, that means that she confiscated the ring, the staff, and the cloak. Why? Why is she doing this? Okay, so he asked the people of the place, saying, "Hey, where was this harlot who was the crossroads on the way?" And they said, "No harlot here. We know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?" So he went back to Yehudah and said, "I've not found her, and the people of the place don't know who she was." Now it's interesting that Yehudah doesn't go back himself, right? He's too embarrassed to go back himself. He sends his friend, by the way, guys, do me a favor. I had this encounter with some woman last night. She has my very precious signet ring, staff, and cloak. Could you do me a favor? Could you deliver this sheep and get back my collateral? She's gone. So Yehudah said, let her take them for herself, lest we become a laughingstock. He was too ashamed. He was embarrassed. It's going to be like this harlot bamboozled me out of my signet ring and my staff and my cloak. Don't let anyone know. It's bad for business. People are going to think they could take advantage of us. Interesting. It gets better. Look at number 13. Look what the Midrash says. Okay, Davar Acher. V'yirah Yehudah. Right? And Yirah saw, V'lo hishgiach kivan shekisata paneha. When he originally saw her, he had no intention of having anything. He wasn't attracted to her at all. He didn't even notice her. When he looks at her, he just saw some woman covering her face. He was not interested beyond that. Okay, so now Midrash continues. Amar, he said, Ilu hayta zona, hayta mechaseh panea. She's a zona, covers her face. That's not for me. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bikesh la'avor, v'zimen lo HaKadosh Baruch. His real intention was just to pass by her. He was not interested in seeing her at all. Right? Bikesh la'avor, v'zimen lo HaKadosh Baruch hu malach. But God had another plan. He summons an angel. Shehu memuneh al hata'ava. He's the angel that is the expert on ta'ava, on pleasures, on all kinds of romantic affairs. And Omar lo Yehudah, and this malach comes to Yehudah. Hey, where are you going? Whoa, slow down, Sparky. Where are you going? Take a look over here. Mehechan gedolim omdim, right? Mehechan melachim omdim. Where are these kings going to come from? And where are these great people going to come from? Vayet aleh ala derech ba'al korcho shelo b'tovato. He was forced to do something that was against his will on some level. It's not what he wanted to do. This was an interesting situation. Now, how do we understand this Midrash? How do we understand this Midrash? It's a weird thing. Right, so on the one hand, okay, fine, Yehudah, man, fallible. Right, but I want to make sure we're not reading some story of some guy's, fantasies. He's walking down the street and we've rationalized his own unique desire for some prostitute, and even though it's his daughter-in-law, we're rationalizing it. That's not what this Midrash is saying. There's something else going on here that's important that we need to understand, that's very much tethered to this concept of tzniut, the concept of pleasure, and the concept of Mashiach, because they're all interconnected. And we'll see this play out through the series, God willing, over the coming weeks in the summer. Okay? Midrash is being very, very enigmatic, but I think it's also being clear at the same time. You want to add?
Yes, so where is the concept of Mechirat Kavshi? In other words, Hashem is actually
Intervening.
making him do
Correct.
it.
Right.
So in other words, he really doesn't have a choice, but he has to do it because
Right.
it's being made. So
This is a great excuse. Every man, like, it wasn't me, it was God. The angel forced me to do this. It's not my fault, right? So, on the one hand, yes, there is a loss of some free will, and there has to be for some reason. And the question is why? Why did it happen over here? What is going on over here? How do we understand this? Let's look at the next source, and we'll try to answer it together. Okay? And this is the Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is another set of midrashim. He says, "V'yar v'Yehudah v'yachshuv elizona ki kasta panea mishum tikasta panea chashuv elizona." Amar Rabbi Lazar, shekasta panea bebeit chamea. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmi. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, kol kala tznuah bebeit chamea zoche v'yotzi mimena malachim. Right? You have this beautiful idea that when you are a girl who's living in your father-in-law's house and you are at tznu'ah, you get a special blessing. What is the relationship between tzniut and malchut? What is the relation between this concept of modesty and kingship and royalty? Where is the relationship here? And royalty. What is the relationship between being at tznu'ah and being royal? So we know we have these ideas that a Bat Yisrael, Bat Malka is her tzniut is pnima, is inner real modesty, is inner modesty. But how do we understand it? So now, let's go back for a second. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree, they ate Tzeddat Tov Ra, what happened? So it's true they realized they were naked, but there's actually a very interesting Seforno who says that at that moment they were able to get pleasure from something that had no virtue. They were able to enjoy something that could have had a negative effect. Meaning, in the pre-Eitz Hadat world, the only things that were pleasurable were things that were good for you. You were not engaging in illicit affairs because they were bad for you. Right? In the pre-Eitz Hadat world, you only ate things that were healthy. If it was unhealthy, it wouldn't taste good. But in the post-world of Eitz Hadat Tov Ra, after eating from that tree, what ends up happening now is I can eat something and enjoy it even though it's bad for me. And this was a change that happened in the world. The world was such, God creates a reality where everything is aligned perfectly. It's aligned to give you the most amount of pleasure, but it's got to have virtue connected to it. Virtue is a moral standing. There's a connection here, and it's severed with Adam and Eve's choice of eating from the Eitz Hadat Tov Ra. Let's look how the story begins. The story begins with Er and Onan choosing to have a relationship of pleasure without virtue. Pleasure, no virtue, no moral standing here. Why would you do that? The goal is for these two things to be completely united. Why? Why is it important? What happens to a world that is completely ruchani, completely spiritual? Is that a world that you and I can live in? And the answer is no, we can't. That everything in the material world has to be, everything in the spiritual world that's in the material world, because that's the only way we can connect to the spiritual world. Right? It's interesting, by the way. It's a little bit of a paradox. The only way you could experience ruchniut as yourself is with gashmiut. The only way to experience spirituality as yourselves is through the physical material. Why? The only way you can have an identity is with a body. You can't have an identity of just being a soul. Because your soul is tethered to a world of infinite potential, infinite everything. You're connected to God. There's very little room for self-expression when you're in a basket of God's soul, His soul basket. You're part of the all of humanity, everything happening at once. There is no you. There's lots. You become you when your soul is put carefully into your bodies, where you are raised by your parents, put into this particular timeline in history, which is the only timeline in history that can challenge you the way you can be challenged so you could grow the most. Okay? But it's the same thing, the same materialism that enables me to experience the spirituality, that distracts me, that takes away, that detracts from my ability to connect to that which is spiritual. Strange. The only way I can have a spiritual reality that I can appreciate is with this material form. In the world of ruchniut, of spirituality, you're just a soul, there's nothing to do. There's no movement. It's all oneness. It's all echad. But it's only here in a world of multiplicity, in a world of things coming together, can I have this concept of lower level, higher level, spiritual ascent, and so on and so forth. There is no ascent in a world of spirituality. You're just in a world of spirituality. It's an olam haruchni. It's just one thing. It's only in this reality that you could experience this thing called ruchniut in a material form. So there's a schism that happens. Adam and Chava create the separation where virtue and pleasure separate. Now, Yehudah and his children, okay, same separation. Separate them, right? In reality, they're supposed to be fused as one. Why? Because that's the ideal reality, that everything that you do should be motivated by its ability to allow you to elevate into something more profound. That every time you have a glass and you make a beracha, every time you have a mezonot, every time you're going to a class, this is an opportunity to grow and develop yourself as a human being, to elevate the material into something more spiritual. But in the world of Yehudah and his children, it's broken. What is the role of a king in Judaism? Yeah. How is a Jewish king different than any other king in the world throughout history? How are Jewish kings different than any other king that ever lived, aside from the 100 wives? A Jewish king cannot have 100 wives.
Ready to sacrifice?
They have a Torah on them.
Ready to sacrifice his children also?
Why do we need kings? Why do kings even exist? Why, if you imagine like you go back 5,000 years ago, and you have 30, 40 people in your community, why would you want to appoint a king? Why would you do that? Appointing a king means that you're giving up some of your rights and control to somebody else. Why would you do that?
Everyone needs a leader. Rules over the people in the country.
So, okay, true. But would you want that? Are you willing to surrender?
If you want
to, like, we'll have a rab.
Yeah, it's true, you do. But are you willing to surrender? I have a rabbi. It doesn't mean I have to surrender myself to them. You know what I'm saying? Like, you surrender your rights. This person would say, kill that person, dead. That's what you're agreeing to. You're agreeing to empower this person, giving this person the power to make laws, to make decrees. And throughout history, most kings were very evil, very narcissistic. It was all about their pomp and they, walking down the street with their fancy clothing and being carried on these thrones. It often went to their head. But a Jewish king is different because a Jewish king does not make any laws. A Jewish king is there to uphold laws. He's not there to tell you what to do. He's there to uphold what God wants us to do. So it's different automatically. He can't make any. There's nothing. That the melech has to walk around with. A Jewish king has to walk around carrying a Torah scroll everywhere he goes. My theory, by the way, if you ever notice the difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazi Torah scrolls, they're both beautiful, but they're very different. Okay. And I suspect that the Ashkenazi Torah scroll is a residue of what a Melech's scroll looked like.
Later.
It had to be something that was more compact and light. And therefore, if you were going to create a Torah scroll for something that was small and traveling, you would do an Ashkenazi scroll like that. But I'm convinced that all Torah scrolls before the diaspora and the exile were all Sephardic, standing up. And I would argue that and probably win that argument because archaeologically we have evidence that all mezuzot were straight in the ancient world and not on an angle. Ashkenazi Torahs, by the way, are always on an angle. I'm not sure if you noticed that. There's in the bima, they're on an angle. What's that?
There's nothing like
You can stand them. You can stand them. they're on an angle because actually there's a debate in the Gemara as to how a scroll should be placed. Should scrolls be standing straight like this, or should they be laid flat like this? So they came up with a compromise and do a little bit of both, right? Sephardim don't compromise, and therefore they're standing straight, right? And that is, if you ever go to an ancient Israeli dig site from like the 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century, where you go to these houses that were made of stone, they actually have a slot that was covered, that was chiseled out for the mezuzot. The mezuzot were always straight. It only became an issue in around, like, you saw the change happening in the 9th and 10th century, around the time of like really Rashi, where Ashkenazim came about, and they made this whole concept of pshara, of compromise in the mezuzot, but they were always straight before that. Okay, anyway, point that I'm making is, let's go back. Again, you have a story over here of two people, of Yehudah and Tamar. Okay, Yehudah is meant to bridge this gap. Tzniut it's not what you think it is. You see, when you think of tzniut, of modesty, you think of, all too often, you'll think of what maybe Arabs think of. You know, a woman wearing a burqa and her whole entire body is completely covered. That is not the Jewish conception of what a tznuah is. Okay, that's what a prostitute looks like, apparently. Okay, but in Judaism, the word tzniut means to create mystery, to unravel, to create a situation where there's something there that you want to look deeper into, curiosity, where you have a sense of identity, where you could project beauty, but also create a space where there's some things that you're going to have to spend effort and time to understand and unravel, right? It's funny, like I used to be a campus rabbi many years ago at Brooklyn College, and when I first started, I started at the Hill House, and I would have all the fraternities and all the sororities come into my office to meet with me and so on and so forth. So my first day of the job, it was the summer, I was around this time of the year, and this young sorority girl walks into my office, and she was definitely not tznu'ah. She was wearing like a handkerchief and a handkerchief. That's all it was, okay? And she sits down, and I'm just like, I just came back from Israel. I spent 4 years in Kollel, and I'm just very uncomfortable having this conversation with this girl who's sitting there, and everything's flying all over the place. So, I'm like, it's very. I tell her, like, it's really, really warm in here. I'm just turning on the AC, and the AC was very cold. She's getting cold, and I want her to leave. So anyway, a boy comes in, right? I guess they knew each other, and he sees her sitting down, and he looks. This is happening in front of me, and he looks over her shoulder to look straight down. Right? And she noticed, she's like, that's disgusting, how could you do that? Like, it's such a violation, and blah, blah, blah. And she's going through this whole entire fit, and she's really upset, and she's very angry. And I felt horrible for her, because this is a horrible thing to be violated like that. But at the same time, he's like, well, what do you expect? Like, you're putting yourself out there, and like, you're all over like that. And that's the response. Right? Now, I'm not saying if it's right or wrong. It's wrong. He should not have done that. No question about it. But the point that I want to make is like this, is that tzniut, people make a mistake in thinking that the more I reveal, right, the more I will attract. It's a mistake, right? The way in which a tznu'ah in Judaism is supposed to be someone who creates a mystery that you want someone else to unravel. What happens to a society where there's no more curiosity? What happens to a reality where no one's interested in anything anymore? What happens to that society? Do you think it's an accident, by the way, that this Midrash tells us that God sends a malach of ta'ava? Because Yehudah wasn't interested. Because Yehudah understood that there's no virtue in this pleasure. There's nothing moral about this interaction. There's nothing here. It's not for me. He has to send down this angel of pleasure to force him to do something that he would never do on his own. To rejoin something. And by the way, this theme, we will see, God willing, over the next few weeks. We see it all the time. Like, you have all these relationships are weird relationships where virtue and pleasure there's nothing there. Why does Mashiach have to come through this type of a union? Of virtue and pleasure that don't go. There's no virtue, but there's pleasure. Why is this force being reunited over here? Why are these two things coming together over here? Why does God create a scenario where Yehudah is forced by this angel of pleasure to do something that he doesn't want to do? But what are we trying to fix? Are we trying to fix the chet of Adam and Chava? Is that what this is about? Of getting ourselves to a place where virtue and pleasure are always aligned properly, right? Is this about something else? Is this a way of justifying Yehudah's, poor decisions? Is this a way of defending Tamar and her choices, right? Because we didn't finish the story yet, and we're not going to have time to finish it today, but God willing, next week we will. So I want to leave you the following questions. Okay, you'll read the story if you can't take the sheets with you; they're yours. Finish the story and ask yourself like this: was Tamar's actions the actions of a girl that is a tznu'ah? Would you define her as a tznius girl? Is she a tznu'ah, or are those the actions of a woman unhinged, who's wild and out of control? Is she dangerous? Right? I'm just saying, like, but how far are you willing to go? We'll get to that. Yeah, but we're not there yet. Yeah, good question. Great, excellent question. Excellent point. She said, did she have prophecy that she was supposed to do this?
She also made herself go out there. She was covered, but she also did the actions that they did.
Correct, 100%. She took on the role of a zona, of a prostitute.
Whether she was covered or not.
It doesn't matter if she was covered or not. She did something that prostitution is prohibited in Judaism. Period. Right? And what's that? It's true there wasn't a Torah, but there were certain standards that even the Shvatim lived with. Now, listen, the Midrash has to go out of its way to tell us that Judah wasn't interested for a reason. Because how do we reconcile this? Judah, again, stop thinking of normal guys for a second. When I think of Yehudah, try to think of the greatest rabbi you can imagine. Imagine the Baba Sali, or whoever that rabbi is for you for a moment, walking down the street and some woman in prostitute garb says, "Hey, Rabbi, come my way," or whatever that that interaction looks like. He says, "Okay, fine." Well, how do we reconcile that? Doesn't make any sense. Do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense. Here's a guy who worked his whole life on being a spiritual Eved Hashem, and for some reason right now his wife dies, his kids die, something's going on here. We're missing something, and I want to try to fill in the missing gaps in the puzzle. God willing, next week we'll do it together. Yeah.
It's because I don't know. I think it's because he's supposed to be. If he didn't say Tamar was right when they found out,
right,
when he had to say, "Okay, this is my signet ring, and I am the father." I think he had to say that. He had to acknowledge to everybody that yes, I'm the one that fault, and I did impregnate her.
The question,
and that was why he was able to come. Was lineage was able to be.
You're jumping forward. I want to take it a step back for a second. It's so easy to we're all drawn to the story because it's a powerful story. We're familiar with the story, but I want to try to highlight the small parts of the story right now. Forget about the end results right now. Right now we're in the middle of watching the story together. You don't know the end, right? Where we are right now as readers of the story, how do we reconcile this right now? Yes, we could argue it away. We'll try to make sense. But the question is why? Why here? Why this? Why Yehudah? Why Tamar? Why his children? Why did it come out this way? What are we supposed to walk away with? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves first. We'll get to there. We'll get to the nevuah. We'll get to what she was aware of, and even if she was aware of it, are you allowed to act on nevuah? If you know that you're supposed to have a child from a certain person, does that mean you can start doing things that are questionably immoral? You know what I'm saying? That's a problem also. How do we reconcile that as well? There's lots of questions. But anyway, for now, story we call it Sarach Iun. We need to look deeper into the story itself. I suspect, and what I'm going to try to do with you guys over the few weeks, is I think there's a correlation here between the Etzadat Tovara and this concept of virtue and passion, virtue and pleasure being separated, that for some reason, which we have not yet clarified, explain why they need to be rejoined. Bezrat Hashem, stay tuned to part 2 next week of Romance and Royalty, and we'll try to answer those questions. Shavua Tov, thank you so much for coming, everybody.